So I want to welcome everybody to this week's webinar with Senator Larson, and ask Grace to please unmute herself so that Senator Larson can speak to us. I want to introduce the Senator by letting you know that he's the Senate Democratic leader. He represents the 7th Senate District, which includes Milwaukee, St. Francis, South Milwaukee, Cudahy, Oak Creek, and Franklin. His priorities are education, government accountability, affordable health care, and jobs. And in the last year, Senator Larson joined the Senate Democrats to increase transparency in the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and to strengthen job training and employment assistance services for people with disabilities. His presentation tonight will highlight additional legislation passed this session that will help and some that will hurt the state. So, Senator Larson, take it away.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for everybody for being a part of this webinar. This is my first one, so hopefully it goes smoothly. We're going to start off right away by diving in about the state's economy and jobs. Wisconsin, since I started in 2011, and since Governor Walker started at the same time, Wisconsin was 11th in the nation in private sector job growth. At the last ranking for 2013, we are 35th. The year before that, we were 37th. So we're still in the lower half of states. The projected budget surplus is a direct result of Governor Walker's drastic cuts to education. I'm sure you've heard me and other folks say it, but Wisconsin actually had the largest cut to K-12 education in Wisconsin history. In the first budget, the following budget saw the smallest per pupil increase in Wisconsin in about 20 years. So both of those things ended up resulting in a lot of extra money, which is what Walker is pointing at as a projected surplus. Also on the economy and jobs, Wisconsin's Economic Development Corporation, also known as WEDC, this is something that folks will remember was created back in 2011 at Walker's direction. He is the one who wanted to shift the Department of Commerce into this more or less accountable institution, and one that is more at his direction. From the very beginning, we wanted to push legislation to make it more accountable, to ensure that there would be checks and balances. The bipartisan legislation that finally made WEDC more accountable finally passed, actually, is one of the last things that passed this session. It passed over the last 2 months. So the other thing that's coming out of WEDC, in addition to loans going out to ineligible institutions and to losing track of loans, as well as folks remember the iTunes gift cards and Badger tickets. One of the things that has come out recently is that WEDC funds are disproportionately investing in Republican-held districts. So although that there is a great need in all districts, most of the money is finding its way into Republican districts, which shows the potential that this is pay-to-play happening in Wisconsin. It's very disturbing considering our tradition of open and transparent government. Also, moving on economy and jobs, Democratic investment, we've moved forward the Workforce Development Bill, which was Act 58. This strengthens job training and employment assistance services for people with disabilities. This is something that we introduced as our job package in early 2013 and was taken up by Republicans and passed with broad bipartisan support. Senator Schilling worked hard with some Republicans across the aisle to get this done. This is just one example of the smart job creation efforts Democrats would be enacting if we had the majority. Another bill that we introduced was the minimum wage bill. This would increase the minimum wage incrementally to $10.10, increasing it 95 cents a year until it hit $10.10, and then it would be pegged to inflation. This was proposed. This was brought up for a vote on the floor, and it was rejected. I'm sure folks probably won't be surprised. It was rejected by unanimous Republican opposition in both houses. So this is something that would give folks a raise that's badly needed. Senator Hansen had done a great job of pushing this legislation across Wisconsin. because it's not just a Milwaukee or Green Bay or Madison issue, it's statewide, even nationwide, and I'm sure folks have heard the president talking about this. Even just next door to us, Minnesota just passed a 10-10 increase, and it'd be good if Wisconsin were at that same pace, but we're going to keep working at it. Moving on health, I think folks are, especially with Obamacare's passage and making it illegal to deny people access to health care, there's still much more work to be done at the state level. And here's some of the things that happened to health in Wisconsin. There's a bill that passed on the very last day, and it was called the I'm Sorry bill. But really, if you wanted to get down to it, you could call it the I'm Sorry, I'm a Bad Doctor bill, where a doctor could come in after a negligent performance on a patient and say, I am responsible, I made a mistake, and those words, and I'm at fault. I take full responsibility. And those words specifically were added in, and it would make it that much harder to be able to hold that doctor accountable. This is something that's really chilling. It goes far beyond the scope of what people said it would do, which is just to make sure that there's honesty after something goes wrong, to basically, give people seemingly blanket immunity from bringing these cases to court. And just so folks are clear on cases like this, there was 14 of them in the last decade. So there was not a rush, as folks want to make it seem. The next one is a rejection of strengthening Badger care. This is something that just happened a couple of weeks ago, where Governor Walker's health care plan kicked off 77,000 low-income Wisconsin residents and forced them onto an exchange, the health care exchange, that was not designed to support those folks of low income. So we are worried about them. We don't think it's a responsible thing to turn our backs on the most vulnerable and the people who really need health care the most in our communities. So Democrats have continued to push this. And this should not be a partisan issue. There are other states that are Republican-led that have accepted the Medicaid expansion. Moving on, the attack on women, forced ultrasounds, was a bill that passed last year. Too much fanfare. I'm sure folks remember President Mike Ellis breaking his gavel as this bill was jammed through on the floor in June. It creates a mandatory ultrasound requirement, including a state-scripted language that a physician must use during the performance of mandatory and unnecessary ultrasound. The bill does not provide an exemption when a woman has been a victim of rape, incest, or if the procedure is needed to save the life of the mother. But a police report must have already been filed, and a doctor must certify and document that they obtain this information prior to the procedure. So that's the only way that they can get an exemption, if there is a filed police report. Which, needless to say, if a woman is in this situation, they should not have to present an excuse from the police in order to obtain something that they have a constitutional right to. This is a severely chilling piece of legislation that's now law, and it severely undercuts the wisdom of women in saying that we're going to second guess what women are thinking and pretend that they are not smart enough to understand the procedure that they're undertaking. Moving on, let's talk about some of the bipartisan legislation that did pass through a lot of pressure late in the session. Senate Bill 300 passed, and this is, folks will remember, it was called the oral chemo bill. It was all over the Journal-Sentinel. This allows for the freedom of Wisconsinites to afford their cancer treatment, whether it be through oral chemo or through clinical treatment. This is something that, after political stunts by Senate Republicans to put a hold on this bipartisan legislation, there was immense public pressure, and the bill finally passed with a huge majority. I think it was 30 votes to 2 against when the vote finally came out. And had there not been that public pressure, and I know that there are folks, I'm sure, who are on this call who spoke up on it, had that not happened, it probably wouldn't have passed. I know a lot of folks end up saying, well, what difference is a phone call going to make? What difference is public pressure going to make when people make up their minds? This is a case where it clearly did. This would not have passed had there not been public pressure. So this passed, but unfortunately only after the Assembly Republicans played more politics to amend it to give guaranteed money back to the insurance companies. Again, being that we are not in the majority, we had to go along with that to ensure that folks had access to that health care that they wouldn't have otherwise. So we're happy that it moved forward. It would have been nice to not have the gift-wrapped package to the insurance companies when we did it, but so it is. Moving on, Assembly Bill 726. This provided relief to seizure sufferers. This was just signed by the governor, actually, I want to say yesterday, if not 2 days ago. This passed both houses, and this is something that it allows for specifically children who suffer seizures to be able to use cannabinoid oil to help ease their troubles. I can't tell you the number of stories that I heard personally from mothers who called in tears trying to get this thing passed. It was bottled up, and again, this is one where public pressure really made it happen. Enough people contacted Senator Vukmir, who was the chair of the committee that wasn't letting this thing out, that finally they were able to get it through and passed on the last day of session. So we're really happy about that piece of bipartisan legislation. The other piece I'm sure folks are happy about is the mental health reforms. As you're all aware, Milwaukee has had its share of mental health tragedies, and hopefully this bipartisan legislation, crafted primarily by Representative Sandy Pash, will make the needed changes to treat our most vulnerable with the respect that they deserve. And then, of course, the legislation addressing heroin use, the number of bills that went through. We're happy that Representative John Nygren realized that treatment is an important part of combating the drug problem throughout Wisconsin. Hopefully there'll be more to come for all types of illegal substances to be able to address this. Folks might not realize it, but we actually spend more in state funds on incarceration than we do on higher education. And a lot of folks who are in our criminal justice system are there for drug offenses. And I think that there is a growing wisdom from folks on both sides to realize that keeping people locked in cages might not necessarily be the best way to rehabilitation. So hopefully this is a good stepping stone to moving our state in a wiser direction. Moving on to voting rights. So now we shift over to bad news again. We did see the Republican voter suppression move forward, which restricted early voting. This did pass. It eliminates weekend voting. It directly attacks and restricts voting, specifically in Milwaukee. Arguments on the floor of the Senate were truly chilling the day this bill passed. It made it abundantly clear the goal of this legislation is to restrict access to the polls in Democratic areas. Specifically, Senator Fitzgerald, who's the leader of the Republicans, and Senator Grothman, who is the assistant leader, and Senator Lazick were especially unfortunate hearing some of these comments that they were saying about how they were troubled by lines. Now, personally, speaking off script here, I'm troubled by folks who want to restrict access to the institution of voting in a free and open democracy. And I think that anything that we do that's going to affect people's voting should be used to expand it and make sure that more people are participating in a democracy. I think when more people participate, regardless who they vote for, it's a stronger democracy, period. And thinly veiled efforts to try and suppress the vote are heartbreaking, and I think they have no place in our country. But unfortunately, I think they saw poll numbers and they decided this was a priority to shut down early voting in Milwaukee. Another bill on poll workers passed. This allows for observers to stand within 3 feet from voters as they come in and register. Obviously, we know that voter intimidation is not a thing of the past, and it is still happening. So now there's a law that actually endorses that and allows poll workers to stand 3 feet from voters. So it's something that's intended to try and bind up the system when people are coming in to vote and make it frustrating for voters. I think the message for folks is this should not let people intimidate them. It should motivate people, I'd hope. There was another effort on voter suppression. A special Senate session could be called if the voter suppression bill is overturned in the courts. Governor Walker and all GOP members know that re-election prospects are much tougher if young people, the elderly, and minorities are getting out and voting. So eliminating access to the polls by requiring requiring a highly restrictive form of identification is truly, again, it's another attack on freedom of Wisconsin residents to exercise their rights. And it's something that's frustrating and specifically impacts those folks who are in the groups that I described. So we are watching for that, and we will see what happens. Shifting in a positive direction, what we'd like to see is a Right to Vote Act passed in Wisconsin, something that protects the fundamental right to vote in any public election held in the district in which they reside. Senator Jen Schilling, a good friend of mine, took the initiative to lead on this one this spring in response to all these restrictive measures that were happening, and introduced this legislation to ensure the freedom of voting in Wisconsin. So that's something, again, when we come back in the majority, this is something that we will push. I think it should be embarrassing for Republicans to push these kinds of initiatives, but unfortunately it's not as they continue to do so. Moving on, redistricting. I think a lot of folks who are willing to spend a Thursday night before a holiday weekend on a webinar talking to you guys, all you folks probably know what has happened with redistricting in our state and how much it has really held back Wisconsin, where a huge chunk of the state ended up voting for one party at the top of the ticket, and that yet at the bottom on the assembly races, seats were still controlled by the opposite party. This, so what we've been pushing, and it's really been led by Senator Cullen, Senator Schultz on the Republican side, is a nonpartisan redistricting commission. This would really base it off of what happens in Iowa, where maps are drawn by a redistricting commission comprised of nonpartisan members. This is a model that's famously used in Iowa and works really well. Takes the politics out of redistricting, takes the word gerrymander out of the vocabulary of politicians. So we think that's how it should be, and that's something we intend to continue to bring up. Just to give people a visual example, I'm a big fan of pictures. This shows what the difference is from what happened in with actual changes on the left of what actually shifted, and had there been a hypothetical nonpartisan map, what it would look like. And so you can see, for example, the first district where there's lots of meandering lines that cut all around in the map on your left. In a hypothetical map, those lines would be a lot clearer cut, and they would end up being more competitive. And I think that ends up bringing people more towards the middle, more towards having a conversation instead of just going to their base. So something that helps everybody. And shifting again, this is the Senate districts and what they look like. You can't really see my district on here because it's so darn tiny. It's number 7. So for those of you with magnifying glasses, but if you look at a district like 17 over on the left, on the southwest on the map, and see how that would look different, and it looks like it makes more sense, whereas the map on the left kind of travels halfway up the map. You also have that same thing with some of the other districts that are out there. So this, actually the map on the left is the 2011 map. That's not the redistricted map. I'm looking at it. If you look at an actual map, it looks a lot worse than that one, the way that they cut it up. But moving on, moving on to equality. This is something where, actually, if you look at the map, this is a great couple that came out to speak out when this bill was introduced. And if you look at the map, it's actually already dated because so many people, so many states are already shifting in the direction of marriage equality that Michigan is now a part of that map. So literally every state that Wisconsin touches individual has access to marriage freedom. So we naturally want to move in that direction. In Wisconsin, on average, a woman who holds a full-time, on marriage equality, wanted to remove Wisconsin's ban on marriage equality. We do have a link here at the bottom where you can sign the petition if you have not already. If you are one of the people, thank you for being one of the 22,000 plus people who signed that petition. It got so much attention that some of the right-wing blogs actually started going after us in the form of open records requests and things, trying to be able to track down folks for gosh knows what. But it's something where people really stood strong on this one. It's an issue that I think its time has come, and there's, as my friend Senator Carpenter, who led this initiative, calls it, there is graffiti in our Constitution that needs to be removed, and that's what this legislation would do. So moving back up, equal pay. Speaking of equality, in Wisconsin, on average, a woman who holds a full-time job is paid $35,890 a year, while a man who holds a full-time job is paid $46,214 per year. Wisconsin women, on average, earn $10,000 less than men each year. And this, unfortunately, is something that Democrats passed a bill in 2009, and it required equal pay enforcement. It was called the Equal Pay Enforcement Act, and it actually was showing success in the state. It was, unfortunately, one of the first things that Republicans repealed in 2011, preventing access to the state courts to ensure equal pay for equal work. Folks still have access to the federal court, but the barriers to getting involved in a federal case are a lot higher and a lot tougher than the state court would be, which is why this is important legislation. It's something, again, we moved forward on the floor of the Senate through something called a polling motion. Every Democrat voted in favor. Every Republican voted against. And this is also something that they repealed just 2 years ago, and I think it's something that we should rely on. We should have that protection in our state. Higher ed, lower debt. I'm getting used to the webinar format. This is where I'd ask everybody to raise their hand if you've still got some college debt, and see where folks are. Grace, who's sitting next to me, just raised her hand. But this is something that for younger people and for parents of younger people who are going through college or have gone through college are all too painfully aware of, that the cost of college is really going up. Higher ed lower debt bill is something that Senator Dave Hansen that did put forward, and it's something that would be the first of its kind in the nation. It would allow student loans to be deducted from income tax, saving folks a lot of money. It would also enable refinancing of student loans at lower interest rates. A lot of folks might not realize it, but if you have a loan through the federal government, you cannot refinance it, and it's stuck right now at, I believe, 6.8%. We'd probably be able to finance it at the state level for half of that, and it would save folks about $1,000 a year. So think about that. You know, if you know somebody who is still paying off college, or you are one of those people, what you could do with an extra $1,000 per year really makes a difference between renting and buying a car, renting and owning a house, or frankly moving out of your parents' basement after you graduate college. So this is something, it would also educate borrowers so that students taking on college debt know exactly what they're getting into. We think that that's a key part of this. And also collect data and make sure that seeing if there's other things that we can do to help lower debt and make sure college is more affordable. You can see the hyperlink there to the left. That's a place where you can sign the petition to support higher ed lower debt. I encourage you to do that. I think you can do it while this is still going on. So if you look at the other chart, pictures tell a lot of stories. This shows how much college debt has gone up. It's nearly quadrupled in 10 years. So it is truly startling and frustrating, especially for college students. We took a tour actually across the state to a lot of college campuses, and the number of students who, you know, they really have the question of whether going to school is worth it considering the amount of debt that they're picking up. That's not a question that students should ask if they're looking to better their lives and looking for high-quality employment. It should be just focused on, you know, studying, doing their best, looking into the job that they want to do. and not trying to figure out how they're going to pay off that debt. On average, takes 19 years to pay off. So this would help address that. Staying on the topic of education, the education disinvestments that had happened have been truly frustrating. We saw the statewide expansion of voucher schools included in the 2013-14 budget. We saw a state chartering authority attempt again. This would again take away local authority on schools. If this moved forward, we were able to stop that from happening and speak out against it. There's another bill that came out, Senate Bill 286, and you can link on it. And if you're looking to cry tonight, basically it completely fell short of holding voucher schools accountable. The only thing it did is it moved up the date that folks would have to report their tests from voucher schools. And I can't tell you the speeches that happened on the Senate floor of people acting like this was the greatest thing that had ever happened. And unfortunately, this broke a promise of many of those Republicans, including the governor, saying that they were going to hold voucher schools accountable. They dropped the ball on this one. It's the equivalent of giving up at mile 1 of a marathon and still asking for a medal. So here we are in the 24th year, still not able to hold voucher schools accountable that are getting tons of public money. I could go on this topic for a while. There was a study that just came out last week that showed that in most of the measures that are out there, public schools are still outperforming voucher schools, and yet voucher schools are getting a higher percentage increase in the funds year after year than our neighborhood schools. So it's frustrating, and it's something that I hope that people become aware of. There was a special needs voucher bill, which, again, I could go on about, but that did not pass. We'll save that for another day when they probably try it again. There was the public school facility bill attempt to force the sale of public schools to voucher schools specifically. That did not happen. There was the attempted repeal of Common Core, which Common Core is based on common sense. It was something that was most pushed by Governor Jeb Bush of Florida. So if the name Bush rings a bell, it's because he's a Republican governor. He's somebody this was not a controversial issue just a few years ago. But for whatever reason, there's fringe elements of the Republican Party that have been freaking out about it, and they held hearings across the state where folks came in from these national groups associated with the John Birch Society speaking out against this. So fortunately, there was enough support to continue with moving forward with common sense and Common Core. But that, again, all of these threats remain moving into next year, depending on where things are at. I did mention already the shortchanged per pupil payments. Again, we had the smallest increase in per pupil payments in 20 years. So not enough to make up for the huge cuts that happened, the highest cut to education in state history that had happened the budget before. So there is a mentality that starving our education system will somehow make it better. And I think that this is one, more than anything, that I fear is going to create a permanent scar on our state in the form of students who are struggling in growing class sizes that are under-resourced, and will take a lot of our mettle to be able to bring back up to speed in the coming years. So we'll stay at it. Moving on Democratic investments, we did attempt to restore funds to special needs education. We did also move forward fair funding for our future, which would ensure that students have access to a quality education across the state. We did move forward on voucher accountability measures and brought that forward through the budget. And we did move forward on better funding rural education. And I'm sure there's not a lot of suspense on this at this point. You could probably guess what happened with each of these initiatives this last session. They failed on party line votes. So it's unfortunate, but again, it's about what we've faced and about what we are likely to face in the future if things do not change. So that's where things are at, and now you've got all my contact info there, and I think most people know how to get a hold of me. But if you're also looking here, we also are on Facebook too. So folks can find us there, and that's where we're posting now that we're not doing the newsletter. So I know a lot of the folks on this call may have gotten our newsletter. We just sent it our last one a week ago. And if folks still want updates, they can go to the Facebook page and get them there. But otherwise, we won't resume it until next year. So that's it. And now I'm going to try and figure out what we're doing next. I think we're taking questions, right?
Yep.
Nancy,
Yep.
you're
so if you have
Nancy, do you want to tell
please
people?
Type them in. Yeah, just type in the chat box at the end of your screen and hit the return. So I have a question on the budget surplus is actually real. Doesn't it just mean additional financing in the future?
So thank you for that question. There's a couple of ways of looking at it where we do have some funds in the bank right now. And it's a little bit complicated, but it does lead to a structural deficit overall. If we continue at the same rate, if we continue with the same cuts that Walker instituted to folks' taxes, and if we continue at the levels that we're at, it will actually lead to a structural deficit. So that means that there's going to be further cuts down the road because there is not investment in the state. We're going to have to pay off these things in the future. So, I mean, the state budget, it's a complicated document. It's something that's not easy digestible for most people in the public, I think. A lot of people's eyes glaze over when you talk about structural deficits versus current surpluses. So let me break it down in a real sense or a real comparison. So if you are looking to duplicate the budget surplus that the state is experiencing right now, here's a way to do it. When you get an offer in the mail for a credit card, you sign up for it, and you just keep doing that for the whole year. You'll get your credit cards in the mail. You can spend them, spend as much as you want, spend over the limit, spend whatever you want on them. But when the bills come, just put them off until after the next election, until budget year 2015. And that's the way to get a surplus in 2014, while at the same time creating a huge structural deficit that will be have to pay it off years down the road. This is something that we have pointed out over and over. Another quick way to look at it is a lot of folks' withholding tables changed recently by unilateral move by the governor. This is something where not a penny is going to be saved by any individual. It just means that the withholding table changes, so a lot more folks are going to have to pay taxes in 2015 on tax day, so a year from Tuesday, as opposed to if their money was taken out in a normal way. So a lot of those folks might not realize it, again, until after the election. So that's, I think, one of the easiest ways to point out the differences between what's real and what is not when folks are talking about fake surpluses.
Great, thanks. So Joe from Grafton, he says he's from Messenger, but that's just his name. Would you say a few words on the source of funds for the tax cuts?
Yeah, some of the projected surplus is from saying that there's going to be additional revenues coming in based off of people purchasing more and more money coming in. Those funds, again, had we kept our school funding at the appropriate levels and made sure that we restored those cuts to those places that sacrificed the most in 2011, then there would not be these low tax cuts that are coming in across the state. I think most people would rather see it invested in their local schools, but that's where the funds are coming from. They're coming from an adjustment based off of what the projected revenues are going to be. And again, because we saw these huge cuts and those have not been restored, there's, again, additional funds coming in.
So Joe again asks, is there any effort to get the U.S. Justice Department to intervene to protect voting rights?
That is a heck of a question, Joe. And I'm going to say this, if there's other people besides Joe that have questions, that would be, you should type those in, because Joe, I see you all the time, and you can ask these questions in person, but I'm happy to answer them. I am not aware of an effort to get the U.S. Justice Department involved in protecting voting rights. I know that there are conversations, specifically Scott Ross over at One Wisconsin Now, when there was a press conference calling for this bill not to pass and calling for the governor to veto it. There was a very clear ultimatum made that there would be court action on this. And just so you know, so I'm not completely dodging the question, we did make sure to put forward amendments that would have been common sense to show that this was clearly just a voter suppression effort. So, for example, I introduced an amendment that said that if there was a historic case of lines that lasted more than an hour within a municipality, then you could provide access to early voting without limit. And that's something, again, to address, to say that, look, the reason we have early voting is to make it easier for people to vote and to prevent those lines. That amendment was rejected. We also pointed out that some of the folks who do use early voting are folks with disabilities. And so we put out there that if a polling location is not ADA accessible, then you'd be able to provide early voting without limitation. And again, that one failed. And there's a number of votes that we put out there, amendments that we put out there would have been common sense, made it easier for folks to be able to vote, specifically if there are cases that are of documented suppression, and all of those failed. So I believe that helps button down a strong court case when one moves forward, and I do believe there will be one, but it won't be from me. So I'd say stay tuned.
So there's understanding about voter ID, one that's at the state Supreme Court, correct,
yeah.
and one that's at the federal appeals court. Is that right?
Yes.
And any idea when those rulings are likely to come down?
Yeah, the state one will probably come down first. So it's again, this is one of these where it's tough for the average voter, the average citizen to understand. But I know that, again, folks who are hanging out on a Thursday night on a webinar, most of you have probably read the stories and seen this, that there are two different cases. One case is at the state court, the state Supreme Court, which has a conservative majority. That one may end up striking it down. But there was, in that case, during the oral arguments, there was an interesting line of questioning by one of the more conservative justices, Justice Rogensack, and she asked about how people would have to pay in order to get the documents necessary to get the IDs, the highly specific identification necessary in order to vote. And she did voice some concern about that. And it's because of that a lot of people who read into these things are saying, well, maybe this might be struck down in some cases. So that one has yet to be decided. I'm sure that that'll happen sometime soon, or sometime over the summer before the election. If it does come close to August, when the primaries happen, then it may not be in effect for that, the IDs. So right now, to be clear, the ID requirement is not in effect in the state of Wisconsin. The second piece is the federal court case, and that is one that is being at the federal level, which would supersede the state case if there is a ruling on that, and that has no clear timeline for when that would be determined, when a ruling would come in that. So those are the two. So for right now, it's questionable whether it will be in effect. But right now, the ID requirements are not in effect. And as someone who is reading the politics, if you're looking to make a bet, I'm betting that they are not going to be in effect for the coming election this fall, for either the August primaries or the November general elections. That the ID requirements will not be in effect. But we will see. We'll watch with great attention.
Are there any further questions? People want to send something in? If not, we'll let Senator Larson go home to dinner and his go home to dinner. and thank them mightily for putting this on for us. I'll remind people that you can let your friends and neighbors know that tonight's webinar will be available on the Grassroots North Shore website. Usually by sometime Friday afternoon, I get everything posted. So you can listen to Senator Larson give the presentation. You can also just review the slides. You should be able to use the links to sign the petitions. And again, thank you very much, Senator Larson. It's been very, very informative and very enjoyable.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody who's been on the webinar and on the call. Thank you for paying attention to what's going on in our state.
Well, we're all revved up for this election, I can tell you. So that's it for tonight, folks. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you.